Today we're going to be installing this CP4 to DCR conversion kit by S&S Diesel. I bought this pup about 6 months ago and I haven't really had time to get around to getting it installed. So I'm finally going to have time today. It just snowed about 10 inches out, so what better time to spend a snow day than getting a DCR put in my truck. So I'm going to get unboxed here and we'll take a little bit closer look at what we have. Here is the DCR all unboxed. Packaging was amazing. Also came with printed instructions in color, which is also really nice. Not a lot of kits come with good instructions like this, so it's nice that S&S does that. My first impressions, I'm glad to get this in the truck and get that CP4 out. That's my first impression. I'm glad to finally hold this in my hands and have it in the truck here by the end of the day, which is going to be nice. I am going to get this piping kit all taken apart here and get this thing installed. We'll start off by removing the intake here. Next, we remove the cold side charge pipe and hot side charge pipe, as well as cover the intake with rags so nothing falls in. And I'm going to remove the vacuum line there that goes to the vacuum pump. Now we're going to get the batteries unhooked. Next, we're going to be removing the engine mounted fuel filter. When you're hitting the fan clutch nut with the air hammer, it's going to take some time. It took me probably about 5 minutes of hitting on the nut for it to come loose. Now here I'm sliding it off the pulley and pushing it back up into the fan shroud, gently up against the radiator so you don't damage it. That way I have enough room to remove the belt. Now I am removing the belt completely as I'm installing a new one. However, you just need to slide it off the alternator and set it to the side and you'll be fine. We're going to remove this pulley bracket, that way we can access the vacuum pump. Next we'll get this vacuum pump removed off the front. There is a fender liner styled cover on the right side. I'm going to remove the front and rear fasteners for that. Just slide it back so I can remove the 5/16 fuel line. I believe these are 19 mil fuel lines on the back side of the CP4 that now need to be removed. Now you can go ahead and remove those lines from the pump. Now you'll take a 17 mil and loosen these fuel lines on the front side of the fuel rail, the first 3. You just need to knock them loose and then you can screw them off the rest of the way with your fingers. You also want to invest in some crowfoot wrenches for these fuel lines. It'll make the job 10 times easier, I promise. All these 8mm fasteners that are holding the fuel rails together, you'll now want to remove. Another 17 mil fuel line on this side, the first one on the fuel rail there. I went ahead and removed all 3 of those lines. Now here I'm putting on a 27 mil deep socket to knock loose that nut that's holding the gear on to the CP4 pump. And when you hit this loose, you just want to get it on the nut and then just give it one tap, and it should knock it loose there. Careful taking it off, you don't want to drop it down to the engine. Usually what I do is I take a pick and I push it on there and then I loosen the nut off with my finger right onto the pick and then remove it that way. There are 3 13 mil fasteners holding the CP4 on that you can access in the valley. So go ahead and remove those. Now what you're going to want to do is grab a ball peen hammer and hit that CP4 pump just gently to knock it loose. Then we can go ahead and remove the gear. You may have to give it a few more taps after the gear is removed to knock the CP4 loose. You may have to fight it back and forth a little bit to wiggle it loose. Now here it finally slid out. So we'll get that removed here. Take a look at it. I pulled off the metering valve on the top and everything looked great, so I went ahead and continued with my DCR install. You want to stuff some rags inside the vacuum pump access hole, that way you don't drop these 250 mil bolts that we're about to remove. It can also be the perfect time to grab a few rags, dry up everything in the valley, and get that all cleaned up. Here we're getting those 250 mil bolts removed. I used a 3/8 ratchet with an extension. Be careful not to strip these or it will make this job 10 times worse. but having that extension gives me just a little bit of play to fit it just enough over the bolt to knock it loose and walk it back out with my fingers the rest of the way. I did find it easier to remove this bolt by using both hands to help walk it out. The surface where the CP4 was mounted up to, we're going to have to clean that up as the best we can. I took some 2000 grit sandpaper and sanded it down, and then took some cleaning solution and wiped it as clean as I could get it. Now we're going to drop in our DCR mounting bracket. We'll just set it on that stud that we left on the bottom. S&S provided blue Loctite for these T45 Torx bolts. You'll install one on each side of the mounting plate. Once they're snugged up, you'll go ahead and torque them down to 25 pound-feet of torque evenly. Now you'll put the blue Loctite on the studs and get those installed on each side of the mounting plate as well. Now it's time to drop the DCR in. Next, we'll get the pump gear pushed back on. Next, we'll get that 27mm nut screwed back onto the pump. Here we're torquing down the 27mm nut to 60 pound-feet of torque. It is important to do this first before tightening any of the 13 mils in the valley, as you could damage the O-ring by unevenly tightening the DCR. Here we're getting the 13mm nuts fastened in the valley. This is going to be 18 pound-feet of torque, and it's very important to not over torque these. You'd also want to start with the bottom nut first. This would be the perfect time to put your turbo coolant line back together before you put your fuel rails on and then cannot access it. Here I'm getting the fuel rail crossover line installed. You of course did not need to remove this to do the installation, however I did find it easier to remove it instead of just pulling it out of the way. You can see I have two high pressure lines there that were supplied with the kit. We'll get those installed. Each of those are going to be installed on the back side of the DCR pump closest to the turbocharger. Make sure you install the right one to each side and don't get them mixed up. Once you have the high pressure lines installed, you're going to want to torque down the line nuts to 26 pound-feet of torque. If you do forget this step, you will have a fuel leak. Don't forget to reuse all your fuel line saddle brackets. You want to get those installed after you get the high pressure lines done. Next, with these return lines installed to the top of the pump. The other two sides, one clips into the fuel filter and the other one clicks into the fuel rail. Now I'm getting my fuel temp sensor installed and capping off the other one with the supplied cap, as mine is a truck that does not utilize that other fitting. So I'm getting this tightened down. I believe that's a 27mm wrench to tighten down that fuel temp sensor. This is a great time to install a new vacuum pump gasket as you already have the pump removed, so I'm going to get that installed here. And of course, getting everything else installed is pretty self-explanatory. Reinstalling the vacuum pump, reinstalling the pulley bracket that goes over top of the vacuum pump, and then the rest of your intake system as well. Now make sure that you fill your coolant back up, and don't forget to prime the system 5 times. At least 30-second key cycle each time.